mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Chapter of APA and Chair of the New Urbanism Division, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, March 11th, and we will hear the presentation, New Data Tools for Supporting Analysis of Equitable Development and Environmental Justice. For technical help during today's webcast, type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call that 1-800 number that's shown in bold. And for your content questions related to the presentation, you can type those at any time in the questions box that's also located in your webinar toolbar on the right of your screen. And we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. And please, if possible, make sure that you also type in who you would like to answer the question. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2016. Thanks to all of those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to their members. Today's webcast in particular is sponsored by the Planning and Black Community Division of APA. To learn about all of our divisions, you can visit planning.org/divisions, and to learn about our chapters, planning.org/chapters. Coming up on your screen will be a list of our upcoming webcasts. To register for these, just visit our webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, you can visit planning.org and log into your account. APA National is updating their website, so it has been a little goofy lately. My suggestion to get your CM credits is up at the top. There's a toolbar, select activities by provider, which is the Planning in the Black Community Division, and then today's session will pop up. Or in the search function, you could try to type in the event number. Some people have problems with that. So your best bet, activities by provider, Planning in the Black Community Division. In this webcast, it has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We do have recorded webcasts that are available for distance education, one ethics, one law, especially for those who need to finish getting their credits together for the reporting period that ends April 30th, the grace period. So for availability of all of our distance education credits, you can, again, check our webcast webpage and you'll get the links, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our upcoming sessions, along with any changes and notifications. And we are recording today's webcast. It will be available on our YouTube channel, just like the rest of our webcasts, youtube.com/planningwebcast. And a PDF of our presentation will be available at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, our webcast webpage. I'm now going to turn it over to Carlton Ely, who is with the EPA Office of Environmental Justice. But before I do that, I just want to make one quick comment that there are a lot of people on the line today, so there may be some delays with the screen transitions. And the second thing is one of our speakers is going to be working off of a particular website showing us a demo. So just please be aware that if you choose to log into that website, if 1,000 people do so at the same time, the link might not work, it might slow down, it might interrupt our presentation. So just please be aware, perhaps wait till after the webcast ends to log on to the site to take a look at it for yourself. So with that, again, I'm going to turn it over to Carlton, who will give a few brief introductions to our speakers and get us going. So Carlton.
Thank you, Christine. I am switching over. And Christine, just to confirm, is that first slide showing?
It's not correct. Could you please go up to display settings? You must be on a split screen and hit duplicate slideshow. Perfect. Thank you. It looks great. And could you please just click your mouse? Oh, perfect. Okay, you're good to go. Thanks.
Thank you again, Christine. Also, I want to thank the members of our audience for taking the time to join us today. EPA's Office of Environmental Justice is pleased to partner with the Planning and the Black Community Division of the American Planning Association on this webinar series. For 36 years, the division has been committed to the professional development of its members, making great communities happen, as well as elevating important policy issues, including environmental justice. Educational opportunities like this webinar represent one means for connecting with the public, and we're looking forward to having practitioners share their knowledge about important topics in coming months. Today's webinar is the first in a three-part series on equitable development. We created this series for the purpose of elevating solutions that should be part of the dialogue for making communities sustainable and resilient. When EPA launched the series a couple of years ago, it gave us a new opportunity to acquaint the public with a very impressive narrative of environmental justice and problem solving. Thanks to the tireless efforts of researchers and advocates, the creative thinking of planners and architects, and the compelling results of determined community builders, the public is finding new ways to align environmental justice and planning as complementary quality of life goals. The focus of today's webinar is new data tools for supporting analysis of equitable development and environmental justice. The objective is to introduce analytical tools that are helping citizens, practitioners, and decision makers to make informed decisions for environmental protection and equitable development in cities and regions. We're absolutely delighted by the level of attention that the National Equity Atlas and EJSCREEN are receiving. We trust today's webinar will help users to get the most out of these two programs. Our presenters will discuss the indicators that are associated with both tools, and they will explain how these tools are being applied by community groups and policymakers. As an environmentalist and an urban planner, I take great interest in this topic. This discussion is timely because of the increasing focus on social equity in the context of sustainability and planning policy. Today we're joined by two experts who are leading exciting projects, the Office of Environmental Justice and the Planning and the Black Community Division of the American Planning Association. Appreciate their willingness to offer remarks. Our presenters are Sarah Truhaft and Kevin Oak. In their respective positions, they have been committed to aligning quality of life goals while supporting community parity. The presenters will wrap up their remarks by 2:00 p.m. approximately, and then we will transition into the question and answer portion of our webinar, which will be led by Christine Dursey. Sarah Truhaft is our first presenter. Sarah is the Director of Equitable Growth Initiatives at PolicyLink. She coordinates the organization's work on demographic change and the new economy. Also, she collaborates with local and national partners on research and action projects that aim to build a more equitable economy. Sarah leads the All-In Cities initiative and manages the research partnership between PolicyLink and the Program for Environmental and Regional Equity at the University of Southern California, which maintains the National Equity Atlas. Sarah, I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Carlton and Christine. I'm really happy to be here. I am just going to start up my slideshow now. So as introduced, I'm Sarah Truhaft, Director of Equitable Growth Initiatives at PolicyLink. For those of you who are new to PolicyLink, we are a national research and action institute advancing economic and social equity. I think of us as a think and do tank. You might be familiar with some of our tools and resources around equitable development. We work hand in hand with local and national partners on policy change and systems change to advance equity and inclusion, and our tagline is lifting up what works. So we really try to share what communities are doing on the ground to advance equity and address our nation's challenges around race and poverty. I am today going to share with you our Equity Atlas and the new tools that we just released, the new indicators, pardon me, we just released around air pollution. They are our first environmental health indicators in the National Equity Atlas. We're really excited to have expanded the Atlas in this way. What I want to do is tell you a little bit about the framing behind the National Equity Atlas tool and then go through the tool with you. And I'm going to use slides instead of doing an online demo just so the technology works a little more smoothly. So first on our framing, for the past 5 years or so, we've really been focusing on shifting the narrative around equity and inclusion in America and in our communities. And what you see on the slide here is the work we've done to try to reframe equity as both a moral imperative. It is about justice, of course, but it is also an economic imperative as our nation becomes a majority people of color country. And so we've been partnering and putting out resources around that narrative, which really starts with demographic change. So we all know that our communities are changing, that people of color are driving growth and change across the country, and today, you know, the majority of students in our public schools are students of color. For the past 5 years, the majority of babies being born in this country are children of color. So we have mapped and analyzed that change, and the Atlas is a tool for sharing that analysis and data. This here is showing you how we've transformed our racial ethnic composition in the country, how it's transformed from 1980 on the left, when we were 80% white, to around 64% white, 2010, 36% people of color, and the projections going forward where we are estimated to become a majority people of color country in 2044. What I'm going to show you now are a couple of maps depicting that shift. And so the areas in red, which you'll see in a moment, are the counties that are majority, that were majority people of color in 1980, and the next map shows you what the country will look like in 2040 on this measure. So you can see that, you know, much change will happen, and what is less talked about is how this is happening everywhere. It is not just happening on the coast, it's really happening in the middle of the country. This map is showing you the percent of total population growth that's coming from communities of color that are growing. So you see here the reality that in places like Minnesota in the heartland, they are also changing too. So we start with demographic change, and then we look at the relationship between inequity, racial inequity, and economic inequality, and the economy. So new research has been coming out from very traditional mainstream economic institutions like the International Monetary Fund, like the OECD. As you'll see here, we have a quote from Larry Summers. He wrote this for the book that we put out with the Center for American Progress called All in Nation, about how racial inequities really pose a threat to the future of the economy, this economic imperative of addressing those disparities. Similarly, the IMF has analyzed inequality and its impact on growth and prosperity in nations, and Manuel Pastor and Chris Benner have looked at that same relationship in United States regions. And so what we say is that equity is the superior growth model that we need to ensure that the population that is our future workforce, our future innovators, is ready and prepared to lead us forward. One thing that we've done is we've looked at what is the potential economic gain of closing racial disparities and gaps. And so what you see here is a snippet of our analysis of that. We've found that if you just close racial gaps in income, you would have a $2.1 trillion gain to the national economy. Here, this is showing the Bay Area. Even in a wealthy region like the Bay Area, there are huge inequities. and there would be $117 billion in additional resources, additional tax dollars, et cetera, if we really address those inequities. And what we've been doing is recognizing that people need data at their community level. We've been trying to take this regional, and the National Equity Atlas is the resource that we produce to democratize this data. Let me back up and say all of this work that we've done is in partnership, hand in hand, with the USC Program for Environmental and Regional Equity, which is headed up by Manuel Pastor, who you all might know because of all of his research on environmental justice. My colleague Justin Scoggins at Peer is on the line, and he is really the data guru who has helped us to lead this effort. So I wanted to acknowledge that. But we've been working to bring this framing and data to regions. So we started out by defining what do we mean by an equitable region. So here is our definition, that they are equitable when all residents, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or nativity, gender, family income, or neighborhood, are fully able to participate in the region's economic vitality, contribute to its readiness for the future, and connect to its assets and resources. So that definition then was used to underpin our framework of indicators to measure it and look at it in regions. And you'll see the framework here has 4 components. The slide's coming up. There's a little bit of a lag here, so I'm trying to keep up. So these are the 4 components of our framework. First, looking at demographic change. Who lives in the region? How is this changing? Then looking at the economy. Can everybody participate in and contribute to the economic vitality of the region? Next, we look at readiness, and this is where we've put the new air pollution indicators because they relate so strongly to health. So this is really where we look at human capital. Is the workforce and the future workforce prepared to lead in the 21st century economy? And then lastly, connectedness. Can residents connect to each other and to the region's assets and opportunities and resources? So we've used this framework in a diverse set of states, regions, county, Fairfax County, to have regional dialogues coming together around the data, and we've produced profiles and reports that use this framework and this definition to analyze how places are doing. We've found that this framing of starting with who lives in your place and how is that changing can really lead to productive dialogues. So now I want to share with you the Atlas. The Atlas is our way of sharing this data broadly. The National Equity Atlas includes 301 geographies now, the largest 150 regions, the largest 100 cities, all 50 states and the United States as a whole. And this is the homepage here, and I'm not going to go too much into it. I'm going to dig right into the indicators, which is the meat of the Atlas. So under the indicators, we have it follows the framework that I've just described, where you can see demographics and look at demographic indicators. And then you can look at a series of equity indicators that are laid out according to that framework of economic vitality, readiness, and connectedness. And this is where we're going to find our air pollution indicators that I'm going to get to in a moment. And then the economic benefits of equity, which shares that data that I mentioned about the $117 billion potential economic gain in the Bay Area. It has that figure for all of the regions in the Atlas. So let me take you straight to the new indicators. So we added 2 new indicators based on the National Air Toxics Assessment data from the EPA. And this is the first one, the exposure index. And I'm going to use it to just share what you'll see on the Atlas when you go through each indicator. So when you pull up the exposure index, let me first start with a definition. This index is a measure of exposure to air pollutants. You all are probably pretty familiar with it already, but basically the number here, it values from 0 to 100, and it's a nationally relative index, so you can compare any place and any population group on it. And when you see the number, it basically is, the number of exposure. So what you're seeing here by race ethnicity is that African Americans and people of color are much more exposed to air pollutants nationwide, as well as the Asian population, the Latino population. The next page is going to show you what else you get when you go to an indicators page on the Atlas. So first is the frame for why this matters for equitable growth. So obviously, air pollution is strongly correlated with health, asthma in children, school attendance for children. We know that there's inequitable exposure to air pollution, and that impacts people's health. So you see here a little snippet of information about the indicator, and then we really wanted to share policies and strategies. This data is about data for change, so you see here the types of strategies that you all are probably moving forward, an example of those, and then further data sources. So we're going to dig in a little bit more to one place. I'm going to skip through a couple slides here and catch up. So I'm going to take us to Minneapolis. So Minneapolis has been in the news because it is often seen as a very high quality of life, great place to live, but yet there are a lot of racial inequities and disparities and a lot of people working on them, but still. So that's why I chose Minneapolis here. So you can see in Minneapolis there are very high inequities in exposure to air pollution, the Black community in particular, but also the Latino and Asian community and mixed and other race, basically all communities of color. What you can do on the Atlas is compare it nationally, and because the exposure index is nationally pegged to nationwide, you can see here how Minneapolis has higher rates of exposure for every group compared to the United States, which is the pink here. So underneath each chart in the Atlas, you get many choices for breaking down the data. And one really useful aspect of the Atlas is the ranking charts. So when you go to this area on the right, sorry, I'm using there it is, you can see the ranking chart here, and then you can choose whether you want to rank all people in the geography, the white population, or the population of color. So here I chose people of color, and you see that Minneapolis region ranks 11th on this indicator, and then you can look at the white population, and you'll see as it comes up, it ranks 26th. So that's really showing you that it's doing much better in terms of air pollution exposure for its white population than for its population of color. The next feature I wanted to share is the source breakdown, and so we also enable you to break it down by the source of pollution. And so what you see here is Seattle. So Seattle, another place that's actually seen as very healthy, environmental. Seattle and Portland surprisingly show up really high on the rankings in terms of exposure to air pollution. And they also have high inequities. This is showing you the source distribution. You actually find here that it's a lot of on-road mobile sources in Seattle compared to other places. You can also break this down by both race and poverty, right? With the environmental justice literature and research really shows that race matters independent of or even when you control for income. And that's what you see here. When you break it down, you see that people of color in Seattle have a higher rate of exposure, 85, who are above poverty, than white people who are below poverty. And so it really shows you the effect of race independent of income. The other indicator that we added is unequal burden. And so that is what you're looking at here. And what I did was pull up the ranking chart for Reading, Pennsylvania. Please forgive me if that is not the right way to pronounce Reading, Pennsylvania. I'm from Ohio, but I don't exactly know the pronunciation there. This is showing you, though, the ranking for unequal burden for Reading is the highest for people of color. I actually need to go to this slide to show you what this unequal burden indicator means. Hold on just 1 minute as it pulls up. I'm used to doing live demos. So here is the unequal burden indicator. This is based on a paper that was in a Social Science Quarterly by Michael Ash and his colleagues, titled "Is Environmental Justice Good for White Folks?" that you probably have read. And this is showing you the share of the population of a group compared to their share of pollution burden. And so this indicator here, I pulled up Birmingham, which has actually a very high ranking on this indicator. And you can see here, you know, the Black population represents 31% of the pollution burden, but just 28% of the population. You can also break down this unequal burden indicator by poverty as well as race in the same way to show those impacts. And now, with that quick introduction to our new indicators, I wanted to just share a few ways that people are using this data, not the new data because we just released it this week, but other types of equity data to advance policy change. So here in California, PolicyLink leads the Boys and Men of Color Alliance, and we've used this framing and data in our advocacy for state policies that address school discipline, workforce policies and programs, hiring, all sorts of policies that are targeting this population. Another way in which people are using these types of indicators, not our own indicators ourselves, is to create regional dashboards for guiding policy. And so this is the Greater Minneapolis Regional Indicators Dashboard, and in red, it's showing you actually the number of days that air quality was unhealthy for sensitive groups. So this is a way of using disaggregated data to really track performance in a region over time. The other circles are for other indicators that they've disaggregated. And then the last point I wanted to make was that this data is being used by journalists to tell stories about their communities and other communities. And so we've seen with recent indicators that we've added to the atlas. Just today, a story came out in GRIST about the air pollution indicators that you can look at. And then just recently, the Atlantic, led by Ron Brownstein and his team at the Next America, did a series around school poverty. So that is just a pretty quick intro to the atlas. I think of it as a very complementary tool to what you're going to hear about now from Kevin. And I think that I'm going to turn it back over to Carlton now to introduce Kevin. So thank you, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you, Sarah. And we want to thank you again for walking us through the National Equity Atlas. It is great to see many of the new additions, including the National Air Toxics Assessment and how that has been added to the existing tool. Our second presenter is Kevin Ope, who is the Acting Communications Director for EPA's Office of Environmental Justice. Kevin manages the development of trainings, events, communications materials, and stakeholder engagement efforts to further the mission of advancing environmental justice through EPA and the federal government. He joined the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency after a number of years working in various positions on federal, state, and local environmental and agricultural policy issues for both nonprofits and government entities. Kevin, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Carlton. And before I get started, I just want to reiterate a quick comment that was made in the overview. So I'm going to be showing this website EJSCREEN today, and to make it go as efficiently and smoothly as possible, if you could wait until after the presentation to jump on the website, that'll just ensure that it doesn't slow down, and I can actually do this presentation without too many things going wrong, hopefully. So I'm excited to talk to you today about EJSCREEN, which is EPA's not-so-new screening and mapping tool for environmental justice. We released it in June 10th of 2015, so still under a year old, but not exactly new at this point. And I'm excited to talk about it because of the same thing that Sarah just mentioned, this whole idea of democratizing data, which is something that I think PolicyLink does an excellent job of. And to give you a perspective as to what that means, EPA and other federal agencies for the longest time have had these huge, bulky data sets that have extremely important information on them, on cancer risk, particulate matter exposure, proximity, and volume of traffic to the average household. But those are really hard to access. If you went into this big data file, you might find your area which was geocoded by a 10-digit number, and then you might not know where exactly is that. And if you did know where it is, how can you actually map it? And once you map it, how can you talk about it? And all of those barriers made this data really inaccessible for the average user, and so only experts really had access to this information. And so what we've tried to do with EJSCREEN is take all of the relevant environmental and demographic data that we can find and find useful in the environmental justice context and bring it all into one place. Basically, the way I like to think about that is we've moved from a phone book onto Google Maps. And our platform is Bing Maps, but nobody knows what that is, so I just use the Google Maps example. Another reason that EJSCREEN is really powerful is that it combines demographic and environmental information to really find those places where there are the most vulnerable residents, so we can prioritize those areas for additional review, resources, and outreach. We all know that disproportionately low-income and minority residents have a greater share of the burden of pollution, and I think that the previous presentation pointed that out very well. But additionally, we know that those populations are also more susceptible because of multiple environmental exposures, because of a lack of access to healthy food sometimes, lack of access to healthcare sometimes, and sometimes a lack of access to educational materials to make sure that there are healthy homes and that basic steps are taken to prevent any sort of unnecessary exposures. And so because of that, these areas are really important to prioritize and to understand where they are in relationship to different environmental exposures in order to find them and for the agency to go to those places that truly have the most need. So now I'm going to get started by showing you a little bit about our website. This is the home page. There's a lot of information on here. You can click on this tab right here just to get the basic information about what is EJSCREEN, how it was developed, how EPA has used it. And as I'm going through this presentation today, I'm going to be showing you a lot of things and clicking around, and it might not be easy to find everything that I'm doing. And so if you want to replicate any of it, this page on Learn to Use EJSCREEN has this little accordion drop-down, and it'll show you how to use basically every feature in the tool. So this can be really helpful if you want to use EJSCREEN yourself. We also have understanding the results. So if you want to understand better what are the data inside of EJSCREEN, what are the dates that it was published, where can I access it, what's the definition of that data, this page can be really helpful. We have the same page for the demographics. We have a great video here on how to understand and interpret the results that are coming out of EJSCREEN. For more technical users, we have documentation. We also have the data. So if you want to modify and recreate it yourself, or if you want to be able to take data from this and import it into your own tool, we've made this as transparent and modular as possible for those people that choose to do so. And then this page right here, additional resources, can also be really helpful. We have a technical document that gives 120 pages of real detail in terms of what it is and how it was developed. So if you want to understand it really well, this is helpful. But if you want a one-page document that explains what EJSCREEN is, we also have a fact sheet. We have some FAQs on some basic questions, and then if you want the full hour-and-a-half presentation and demo on EJSCREEN, you can click here and go to YouTube and see that as well. We also have all these other tools that have been developed by EPA and other federal agencies that can be really important in environmental justice context. So I encourage you to go on this page and check it out. There's a lot of really great information here. But I'm going to spend most of my time actually in the tool itself. So you just click this button, Launch EJSCREEN, and it'll take you right to the page itself. And before I get too far into this, I do want to make a couple of caveats real quick, because EJSCREEN is a really powerful tool, but it does have limitations. I like to think of it is a screening tool, and I like to think of the analogy of using a sift. So if you're panning for gold and you pick up a lot of silt and dirt and rocks, if you're sifting it out, a lot of times you can quickly get rid of a lot of things you don't need. It can help you focus in on the things you're looking for. But once you're done sifting, it doesn't mean that everything that's left on top is gold. You really have to do some additional searching. You have to do some additional analysis to ground truth and make sure that what you're looking at is right. So this can be very helpful for providing an initial snapshot and put you in the right direction, but it's not a final conclusive statement. It doesn't define EJ areas, and you really need local context and local information to ground truth anything before the analysis is complete. So EJSCREEN, as I mentioned, is a geospatial data platform, so it looks a lot like Google Maps. You can click and drag and drop. You can zoom in, zoom out using the scroll key. It actually starts out in Northern Virginia, but for the analysis that I want to do today and to sort of demonstrate the power of this tool, I want to start by going to Salt Lake City, Utah. And the demo that I'm going to be giving is an example that one of our Urban Waters grantees gave us permission to use for how they did some outreach with communities around cleaning up the Jordan River. So I think that this is the Jordan River, but I'm not entirely sure, so a good way for me to find out. I'm going to quickly go in here under Map Supplementary Layers. I have Water Features, and then I'm going to click Compared Streams. And I know the Jordan River in Salt Lake City, Utah is one that has persistently had problems with pollution, and so I'm going to click here just to double check that that's the right thing. I'm going to click More Info. It's going to take me to a page real quick that shows me that this is the third segment of the Jordan River. It will show me that there's a number of causes of impairments, including benthic micro and vertebrate bioassessments, which is a mouthful, dissolved oxygen, E. coli, as well as phosphorus. And I can also see that the state has created a TMDL to address the dissolved oxygen problem. So if we're doing a little bit of cleanup and organizing around that, knowing what efforts the state already has underway can be really helpful. And so already we've got some useful local information just from a couple of clicks. So I'm going to go back here, and also before I get into the maps and the report section, I might want to just use base maps, which is something that we all have access to really understand the community a little bit more. I can see that this area does look residential. It looks like it's surrounded by a lot of industry, as well as 4 highways. Up here is I-80, down here's 2100 South, and then the river runs right through it. So this community does have a lot of industry and highways that surround it. There's definitely people that are living right there in the middle of it. If I zoom in, I can also see how important this river there is. Although on the outskirts there's not a lot of green space, all of the parks are right along the river, but because there's so much illegal dumping, because there's a lot of pollution in the water, it smells bad, and it's discouraged people from going to these areas. So where there are the most green spaces in this community, they're seldom not used because of the existing pollution that exists there. So before I get too far into this, I really want to understand more of the demographic conditions of the community that we're looking at. So I'm going to go into map data, go to map EJ indexes, and go straight to demographic information and click on minority population. I'm going to click right here on this over arrow so I can change the transparency so I can still see the underlying community, because I want to understand how these maps are in relation to the community that I'm looking at. So what you see here is all of these little different shapes, which are called block groups. They are polygons that are defined by the census. There's 214,000 of them that cover the entire United States, and on average there's about 1,400 residents per block group. And so this is as far as we can possibly push the data at the community level, and those of you working in environmental justice know how important the neighborhood level context is. A lot of the times when we're talking about linguistically isolated communities, we can be talking about groups of 500 or 600 individuals. And if we're looking for them and looking at information at the zip code level, then they're going to quickly disappear if the way the data is aggregated is 20,000 people on average. Even with census tracts, 4,000 to 6,000 people per unit of analysis, they can quickly be lost. And so pushing this down to the census block group is really powerful. Additionally, you're going to see that there's different colors on the map. We've also use percentiles compared to the rest of the country to give you this idea, is this problem that we're looking at relatively common or rare? So for example, I can click on this block group. And I can see that this block group has, let's see, 1,817 residents, and it is 73% minority, which is in the 81st percentile. So what that means is that just under 3 in 4 residents are minority, and that puts it at the 81st percentile. So only 19% of all of the other 214,000 block groups in the United States have a higher percentage of minority residents. If I go through and click on low income, which we define as 2 times the federal poverty threshold, I see a number of these things are lighting up red, which I can see from my map means they're in the top 5th to 0th percentile, meaning only 5 to 0% of block groups in the rest of the country have a higher percent of residents who on average make less than 2 times the federal poverty threshold. And click here and see, again, just over 3 in 4 residents makes just under 2 times the federal poverty threshold, which puts it at the 95th percentile. So only 5% of block groups make less money on average per household. So that's relatively rare. That's information that's important to bring to bear in a context. And it's also important information to understand when you're talking about doing community outreach, because a lot of times in these communities, people will be working 2 or 3 jobs, be living in stressful situations, and so a traditional outreach approach might not work as well. And so you might need to think about how to define an outreach approach that can address folks that are living in conditions like this. And also look at linguistic isolation. I'm going to click on this block group and I can see 30% of residents live in households where nobody over the age of 14 speaks English very well. So 1 out of every 3 households is linguistically isolated, which is at the 97th percentile. That's extremely rare. It means that if you're doing outreach, you're probably going to need to make sure that you have people that can speak both Spanish and English and that materials are also translated. You can also look at percent less than high school education. These are all adults over the age of 25 that have less than a high school education or a GED equivalent. And I can see right here, for example, that 54% or 1 in 2 adults in this area have less than a high school education over the age of 25. So again, in terms of understanding how to do community outreach, whether it's around a permit, an enforcement issue, or a community cleanup issue, that's very important information to understand. And then quickly, we also have under age 5 and over age 64. These are pretty standard definitions, and those are important in the context of susceptibility because we know that those populations tend to have more, tend to be more susceptible to negative health exposures given equal level of pollution. So that's important in air pollution, lead paint, and other conversations. And then we have these environmental data sets that I talked about that are really important, but now that are a lot easier to display and understand. So I can click on these real quick, particulate matter and ozone. I'll zoom out really quickly to show you. For the most part, these tend to be regional in nature, so you're going to have a really similar score throughout here because air isn't very local just to here or there, especially with things like PM and ozone. So I can click here and see that this is in the 75th percentile, that this is in the 87th percentile, meaning that only 13% of block groups have a higher ozone score than the area that we're looking at here. These data, which are part of our NATO or National Air Toxics Assessment, have been temporarily left out of the first interim version of the tool. We're updating EJSCREEN, and they're going to be put back into the tool in just a couple of months. It should be released in May or June, and these data with new 2011 indicators will be a part of the tool. We have traffic proximity defined as traffic proximity and volume to the average household. So I can click here on this block group, for example, and see on average 690 cars pass by the average household that lives in this area per day, which puts it in the 97th percentile. So only 3% of households have more traffic that go in front of their house than this area right here. And we know that, as Sarah mentioned, traffic or mobile source pollution is correlated with asthma and other negative health outcomes, so that's extremely important information. We have our lead paint indicator. This is stock of housing pre-1960, which is an indicator for where there might be old houses where there's a greater chance that there's lead paint and lead dust where the exposure could be higher. We also have proximity to a number of other facilities. So this is to Superfund sites. Because this area that we're looking at is surrounded by a number of facilities, it's not surprising that a lot of this area lights up red, and we can see later exactly where those Superfund sites are within this tool. proximity to facilities with risk management plans. Those are facilities that are permitted by the Clean Air Act to have large amounts of volatile chemicals. And then we have proximity to transfer, storage, and disposal facilities, which doesn't appear to be so much of an issue. And then proximity to major water discharges. And with looking at this segment of river being polluted, we can look up north, and of course we can't make any correlation that there's a lot of permitted major water discharges up here and there's more pollution down in this area, but we can understand that that may be a potential source of contribution in an area that we might want to look into a little bit deeper. And then quickly I'll show you our EJ indexes. And so basically what these are, I'll start off with traffic. These are going to show you where there is a high percent of low-income and minority residents, as well as that individual given environmental exposure. So we literally just multiplied the percent low income and percent minority subtracted from the national average by the environmental exposure to understand, is this an area where there is a high amount of low-income and minority residents, as well as that given potential exposure. So clicking here, I can see that the demographic index is at the 86th percentile, so the percent of low-income and minority residents compared to every other block group in the country, only 14% have a higher composition of low-income and minority residents. And I can also see that 390 cars pass by the average household daily. So this gives me an idea that this is an area that probably is more vulnerable and susceptible, but also does have pollution. So this might be an area, if I'm looking at doing outreach around putting potential mitigation efforts from traffic, that I might want to start at first. Also with lead paint, you know, if you go to Georgetown, for Washington, D.C., that has a lot of housing pre-1960 that might light up red, but those are areas that have probably been retrofitted. But also in Northeast and North and Southeast, those areas light up red. And so understanding where there is low income and minority communities and older housing really gets at the heart of where is the place where, if I want to do lead paint remediation and outreach and educational efforts, I should start with, and this will give you a really good picture. So these EJ indexes can be really powerful. So those are our maps, and maps can be really helpful if you want to start from a zoomed out perspective and really understand where there might be potential hotspots. But in this instance, we know our predefined area that we want to be doing outreaches in this community right here. So instead, I might want to just get all of the information I looked at in one central place, and that's where our reports can be really helpful. So there's a number of ways that I can get reports in the areas I'm looking at. I can start with the pin feature, so just literally drop a point in the map, and then I can change the buffer size. I want to do a 2-mile buffer, and click that, and it can aggregate the information for all of this into one single report. I might want to do just a basic square, so I could do that. If I wanted to do a regular polygon, if I want to do an irregular polygon to get the boundaries of the community I'm looking at completely, I just need to do a series of clicks. And double click to finish it, and I have this area, and all of this will be presented in one central place as well. Because we're doing a river, I might also want to do a trail or a path. And so what I'm going to do here is start from the top. I'm going to do a couple of quick clicks. I've actually pre-done this a lot better than I'm doing now, but since I'm on time frame, I'm going to just quickly show you how that might look. And so once I get to the bottom, I'm going to double click. And again, I might want to do a 1/2-mile buffer this time. And that's going to aggregate the information for all of the households that fall in the buffer area that I've created right here in one central place. And so if I go to Explore Reports, I can start again with our demographic indicators. This time we can compare it to our states and regional percentiles as well. So for example, I can see the minority populations at the 79th percentile compared to the rest of the country, but within Salt Lake City, which has less minorities than the average state in our country, it's at the 98th percentile. So in Salt Lake City, this percent minority is extremely high compared to the rest of the state of Utah. We can also look at this information in environmental indicators, and this is a really good place where you can understand the importance of relative commonness and rarity. So let's look at particulate matter, for example. In the average U.S. percentile, they're only at the 32nd percentile. So what that means is compared to the rest of the country, their average particulate matter potential exposure levels very low, but compared to the rest of Utah, it's at the 99th percentile. So what that tells me is that Utah probably doesn't have a very high level of particulate matter exposure compared to the rest of the country, but compared to the rest of the nation, the number is pretty small. On the reverse, we can see that Utah probably has a lot more ozone exposure than the average state, because compared to the rest of the country, they're at the 87th percentile, which is very high, but within Utah, the number's at the 16th percentile, which is very low. So this gives you a sense that ozone is more of a regional problem that is particularly bad in Utah, but within the state, there's actually a lot worse areas than the one that we've selected here for review. And so that's where this information can be really powerful. But I want to get all of this information in one report. Then I'm going to click on this to get what's called our EJSCREEN standard report. And I'm going to click, I would click that button because it's a demo. I've preloaded it, so there's no issues. The first page is going to show you the outcomes of our EJ indexes, all of which are very high because there are multiple environmental issues that we saw, but there is also very high elevated demographics. On the second page, it's going to give you a map, which will actually display the information you have showing there. So this is a better looking trail that I drew the first time. The underlying is the map of linguistic isolation. And then here we get the raw values. So this will tell you the story behind the actual bar charts that you're seeing. So for example, I can see that in the area we're looking at, traffic is at the 88th percentile. But why is that? It's because 220 cars pass by the average household daily compared to the US average, which is 110. So because this number is twice the national average, it means that it's at the 88th percentile. Only 12% of areas have more traffic by the average household in this area. Again, when we're talking about linguistic isolation, we can see that 1 in 5 households, or 19%, no one over the age of 14 speaks English very well, which is very high compared to the rest of the state, very high compared to the rest of the region, and also very high compared to the rest of the country. So this gives you the information that helps you tell the story by presenting all of this information that's easily accessible and understandable. We also can, if you go here and click on this, you'll get an ACS report, which also can be very helpful. So this will tell you that there's 18,000 residents that in the area that we've selected, 12,700, which are minority. I can see the breakdown of the minority populations and where they are. I can see the average educational attainment. So for example, 18% of the residents live in the area that we have seen over the age of 25 has less than a 9th grade education. And only 10% of the residents have a bachelor's degree or more. And so this gives you an idea of what the average educational attainment is, but really broken down, not in terms of a yes or a no, but with a lot more detail. Furthermore, if we're trying to get more information about where these linguistic isolated populations are, what languages they can speak, we can see the breakdown of the linguistic isolation, specifically which households and what languages are spoken. We can see that of those 963 households which are linguistically isolated, 833 or 87% of them speak Spanish at home. So if I do want to translate materials and I have limited resources, this tells me that I should probably invest in Spanish, but if I have more resources, I should look into also translating materials in the specific Asian Pacific languages and other Indo-European languages. And then we finally can see the breakdown of income by household and understand, is this an area that is relatively homogeneous, or is there spikes? Is there very rich people but also relatively lower income people living in close proximity? We also get information on owners versus renters, which can be a good proximity for amenities in the community. So there's just a lot of information you can bring into the discussion in terms of understanding the community, their capacity to respond, where there may be potential barriers, and then also what environmental conditions exist on the ground in the areas you're looking at a very high resolution. Beyond the reports and maps, there's a whole bunch of other useful features that you can bring into the conversation. So for example, when we go back to map, and I know that when we saw the environmental indicator, it looked like there was a lot of red on the map. So you might want to say, where are these Superfund sites? Well, I can go into map data, go to map supplementary layers, and click sites reporting to EPA, and click Superfund. And that's what Superfund site here, 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 and here. And I can actually click on those. I can see that this is the Utah Power and Light American Barrel Company Superfund site. I can click more information to see when was that discovered. It looks like it was in 1981. What efforts have been taken? It looks like this has been cleared for a 5-year review, so this site has been remediated, but it's still being monitored. I can also see, though, besides just the Superfund sites, are there brownfield sites around? By clicking brownfields, I can see, are there other facilities permitted for toxic releases? And so I can click here on one of these brownfield sites and get a lot of information about what that is and the details behind it as well. And I could go through this. There's a ton of information in here about demographics and otherwise. that you can access. We can also look to see, is this place that we're in, is there railway? A lot of the times we're dealing with goods movement issues, and so is there railroads? I know there's a lot of highways around, so when I click that, yes, in the community that we're looking at, I'm going to get rid of some of these maps so you can see more clearly. I'm going to change my base map here to canvas gray. There is a lot of rails and transportation that goes around, so not only are we talking about highways, but there's also railroads and other transportation in every direction that may potentially be contributing to other sources of diesel particulate matter or other types of exposure. We saw how you can access water quality standards. You could see if the place that you're in is in attainment for air quality. There's also information on additional demographics. So everything you saw in that ACS report, you can also map. So say, for example, I want to find out what those Asian languages, Asian Pacific Islander languages are. We can map those one at a time to see if it was Japanese or if it was Chinese or Korean or other specific languages. Beyond that, we also have other maps that you can bring in here that are curated. We're actually, for our next update, going to be filling this with a whole bunch of different maps on climate change indicators and other useful information that will be available. And then finally, if you have your own data that's already been created on GIS, I know there's a lot of GIS and planning experts on this call, you can bring it in simply by publishing it in ArcGIS, getting a URL, adding it here and hitting add to map. So this tool is supposed to be made as easy as possible for you to use your own data as well and bring it into the conversation. So that's really a good overview of all of the features that are in here. There's a lot of information that's in here. There's one other plug that I did want to make before I hand over control back to Carlton for the Q&A, which is that we did release the tool as an interim version in June 2010, and we made a really explicit, intentional drive to go out, do a lot of education, webinars, trainings in all 10 regions. We've done over 200 different engagement events, and we've collected hundreds of comments from the public in terms of ways that we can improve the tool, because we know we don't have all of the answers. And from all those hundreds of comments, we've made a list of new enhancements and improvements that were driven 100% by the comments that we saw. So everything that we're doing has been requested from the public. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a teaser of the next update, kind of like how Samsung and Apple will do, so that you'll want to see it when it comes out. But in the next version we have coming out, we have a lot of new features, and a few of those include being able to save your own sessions. So everything I did today, I would be able to pull up tomorrow and do again rather than have to recreate it from scratch. We'll also have things like custom cutoffs. So for example, if I'm looking at traffic, if I want to display only the block groups where more than 200 cars pass by the average household daily, I just need to click a couple buttons and then only those block groups would show up. So it makes it really easier to display the specific areas, the specific conditions you're looking for, whether it's linguistic isolation, whether it's particulate matter exposure or stock of housing pre-1960. And we're also going to have, so where we had these reports earlier, we're also going to have an additional report that you're going to have access to, which is a public health one that's developed by CDC. It's a county health report, but it brings in a lot of other information that's useful in terms of asthma, smoking, average days of attainment with particulate matter and other EPA air quality standards. So those are just a few of what are going to be a lot of different exciting new updates to the tool. And the last thing I will point out is anybody who uses EJSCREEN, if you do see other ways that we can improve the tool, this isn't our last update. We're going to be updating this tool annually. And we encourage you, if there's other types of data that's out there that we don't know about that's accessible, if there's other features that we could bring this tool more useful, if there's other things that we should know about, please send in the information to us. You just have to put in your name, your email, and comments. We have a contractor that's checking that and updating us every week on everything we get. We're very responsive if you have questions or concerns. But your comments so far have been really helpful to making a better version of the tool, and we'll continue to do so as we're working on updating this tool, not only for this next version, but down the road. So that's everything from me, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Carlton.
Kevin, and you can turn the controls actually over to Christine Dursey. It is currently 2:02. Again, we want to thank Kevin Oak for walking our audience through EJSCREEN and explaining the depth of information that the public can access to characterize environmental conditions within communities generally, but especially within communities that may be underserved, under-resourced, or overburdened by pollution. And thank you, Kevin, also for explaining that the agency is soliciting public input so that we can constantly improve EJSCREEN as a tool. I also want to extend my thanks again to Sarah Truhaft of PolicyLink and for the great work that they're doing in order to democratize data so that the public can be more effective in advancing the goals of equitable development. We are about to start the question and answer segment. I believe the controls have been turned back over to Christine Dursey, and Kevin has presented a slide that has the contact information for Sarah and Kevin if you wish to contact them. While Christine is preparing, I just want to remind the audience to mark your calendars for the next webcast in our three-part series. It will be Friday, June 24, and the focus will be faith-based development, neighborhood anchors as community builders. And with that, I will now turn it back over to Christine Dursey for the question and answer period.
All right, thanks everybody. We have a lot of questions coming in. Just a few disclaimers. There are some really complex questions in here that I don't think are fit for today's purposes. And also there are some questions that are very specific to certain geographic areas. So if your question isn't answered, please be sure to just contact our speakers directly and then they can get those addressed. Secondly, Sarah, if you're on the line, you could quickly introduce Justin. Justin is a colleague of Sarah and who is on the line with us just to kind of go over some of the data questions because I guess he's a little more in tune with that. Sarah, do you want to introduce him real quick before we get started?
Yeah, absolutely. Justin Scoggins is the data manager at the USC Program for Environmental and Regional Equity, and he is the mastermind behind the Equity Atlas and manages all of the databases driving it, and also has a lot of expertise in environmental justice. So I would direct the more technical questions to Justin.
Okay. All right, let's get started. This is a question, I guess, for Sarah and Justin. In the atlas, could you please define who people of color are and where the labeling came from to determine that?
I can define that. That one's very easy. So our racial categories for people of color, what we did was we just took the non-Hispanic white population. So we combined the two questions that are people self-identify as ethnicity, as Hispanic or non, and then a racial group. So we do the non-Hispanic white, and then everyone else is labeled as people of color.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question is, again, for the two of you, can the data that's used to create, is the methodology used to generate the air pollution index available? And I guess I personally will add to that, is there a general methodologies page or anywhere where folks can go just to get more information on these numbers?
There is, Christine, could I pull up the atlas? Would that work?
Oh yeah, hold on. Let me change it back. I'm going to change the presenter back to you. Okay. I just changed it back to you, so you'll get that little pop-up message again. Perfect.
Great. Yeah, I just would like to show folks where they can go actually on the website to find more information about the data and methods.
And while you're doing that, Sarah, I can really quickly answer just because I think that I pointed it out in one of my earlier slides, but right on the EJSCREEN webpage, if you go under Understanding EJSCREEN, there was the environmental indicators page that has all that information in one easy place with all the links and data and dates.
Great. So here we are on if you're at the Atlas homepage, nationalequityatlas.org, and then about the Atlas. Within that section, you have these subsections around the background of the project, and then the data and methods. And so here you'll get information about our database, about the geographies that are in the atlas, and the indicators, and then the technical documentation. That's where you can download the thicker data and methods document that includes the more in-depth methodology. Let me just show you one more thing, and then I'll have Justin describe the specific methodology. But in each indicator, there is this definition next to the title. This is easier to show in a screen format than in a PowerPoint, but here you'll get a basic definition of each indicator. So under the exposure index, for example, you can pull up the basic definition here and then a link to the longer document. So Justin, can you share about the exposure index methodology?
Sure. So for the exposure index, we basically followed methodology used by HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, in putting together their really recently released environmental health index, except in this case, it's kind of reversed. So high values mean high exposure rather than greater health. And essentially what the values in the chart reflect are sort of the average ranking nationwide that people in each region and of each racial ethnic group, what their average neighborhood, what is that rank? What is the ranking nationwide in exposures to the you can look at either the cancer, non-cancer, or cancer only, or non-cancer only. But basically, what is their average exposure ranking to these risk estimates from the National Air Toxics Assessment?
Okay, great, thank you. And Kevin, when you interjected also about getting the information on the EJSCREEN, is there a place also to get definitions?
Yeah, so on that environmental indicators page, there is brief definitions.
Okay.
If you want the full definition, and we have a really great one-page, two-page descriptions of each environmental indicators in our technical documentation, and you can find that under either Understanding EJSCREEN Results, well, actually, I guess I could show you. Give me one quick second. So going back to the page here, you can just go to the technical documentation. If you go to additional resources, and we have the technical document right here, and we have just a wealth of information about what the indicators are, why they were selected, literature review on them, and then other information about how to access them, and that's in our appendix, and then we have shorter explanations of them right here in this earlier section.
Okay, awesome, thank you. This question is both for the Atlas and the EJSCREEN. Can the data be used to be put into tables, graphs, essentially mapping tools, shape files, things like that? Is there an easy way to get those transmitted?
I'll answer for the Atlas. So we do not have downloadable data yet, except for the indicator that I showed around the GDP gain. That there is a spreadsheet associated with that. We are absolutely open to doing that. It's more a matter of capacity and priorities in terms of the Atlas and building it out. So we do it on a request basis, and we are thinking about making the data downloadable in spreadsheet form. We are moving to having a better mapping platform within the next several months. We'll be releasing that, and I don't know, Justin can probably answer about that data, if that would be downloadable or not. I'm guessing it's probably not going to be. Justin?
Yes, so all of the kind of additions to the Atlas are kind of staged and have kind of priority ranking. I think for the first priority would get kind of the data underlying the indicators that are kind of graphed, where there's basically it's at the city or regional or state level. For the maps, I think a lot of the the data that we would be using for the maps is already pretty easily accessible from the Census Bureau. A lot of it would be from the American Community Survey, so that might be a little less of a priority to figure out how to deliver that through the atlas. That's what I would say about that.
And then I can answer for EJSCREEN. Let me just, again, go back to that page. Let's see. So we do have all the data available for download, and if you go to technical information and then you click download EJSCREEN data, we have an FTP site that has all that information available. You can click through and get that. And so those of you that prefer the phone book approach instead of the Google Maps approach, it's all right here in those big bulky Excel spreadsheets and CSV files. Additionally, real quick, within the tool, if you want an Excel spreadsheet of the data you've collected, so say you don't want something in a report like this, you want something that you can manage a little bit more, then I would go to Explore Reports and then click Tabular View. And then you have all of the data in an Excel spreadsheet, basically. It's manipulatable in that sense, and then I just need to move this out of the way for a sec. And then you can click on this floppy disk, which is kind of an outdated graphic, but this will allow you to save this in an Excel spreadsheet for any area that you define, and then you can access that later. So that's a couple of ways to access the information. And then lastly, if you do have your data, just to re-emphasize, if you have additional data you already have you want to bring in, you can do that just by clicking Add Layer from the web. So there's a lot of different ways that you can modify and make this tool more modular for your purposes.
Can I just add one thing to our response just to clarify that Atlas, the reason why you can't download all the data behind the Atlas is because it's a custom built site, and so the data that's deriving it is in separate spreadsheets for every indicator, and they're not intelligible, and so it takes us time to put it into an intelligible format because of the nature of the site. So I just wanted to explain that. We're not against doing it, but it's just having time.
Great. For both the Atlas and EJSCREEN, and Justin and Sarah, if you want to go first, how often is the data updated?
So most of the indicators on the Atlas are going to be, we're in the process of updating them all. Right now, the end year for most indicators is 2012. For some more recently released indicators, such as these indicators on environmental health, the end year is reported as 2014 because it's based on the 2014 5-year ACS summary file along with the 2011 NADA. You know, rather than reporting 2 years, we just picked the latest year, although that's explained in the tooltip. But in general, since most of the indicators are derived from the American Community Survey, we'll be updating them annually, and we're currently working on adding both 2013 and 2014.
I'm trying to find the mute button again. And then for EJSCREEN, our commitment is to update the tool annually. For this first update, it's taking a little bit longer because of the fact that we have an enormous amount of requests that have forced us to ask a lot of different questions related to trade-offs with policy concerns, resources, and then technical challenges. So this first one, because we are wading through a lot of different information, it is taking more time, but we are committed to doing that annually. We will be publishing the next version of EJSCREEN in May or June, and we'll keep you informed on that. And then also, just in terms of the data vintages, as Justin just mentioned, some of our vintages do vary. So for example, with the National Air Toxics Assessment, that data is 2011 when we're putting it back into the tool. And the reason for that is that we're taking a lot of data that's reported from each of the states. We pull it in, then we have to model it with a lot of inventories we have from states and then pull that all together in one place. So because of that, it takes 2 or 3 years to get that information ready. But we do keep the most up-to-date data we have available in the tool.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for the Atlas. This is kind of interesting. Is there data available that can show the dispersion rather than the concentration of people of color in a metropolitan area? For example, the Black and Latino communities tend to concentrate in neighborhoods rather than intermingle as more Asians do.
Justin, do you want to address that question?
Sure. Currently, there isn't, although we do have plans in the future to add measures of segregation as well as the kind of adding a mapping component to the site, as Sarah was describing.
And I can actually answer that because that's something that is a feature in EJSCREEN. Because our information is at the block group level, you can, so when we saw, for example, percent minority, you can see just minority versus non-minority. But also, as I showed in the supplementary demographic layers, you can display race one at a time, up to 40 different races. And in the next version of the tool, we will also have maps that show the demographic dispersion by individual ethnicity. So each dot representing an aggregate of minorities so that you can look at a city and understand the dispersion of different ethnic and minority groups within different geographic areas. So, although that it won't correlate with the disparities, that really great feature that National Equity Atlas has, and unfortunately we don't.
Okay, thanks. Kevin, this one's for you. Do the EJSCREEN attributes at the block group level consider margins of error for the stats that are derived from American Community Survey, which has significant margins of error?
So again, we do acknowledge that there is going to be the margin of error, and pushing down to the census block group level will increase the margin of error. But at the same time, one of the things that we would say is that when you zoom out in a map, generally what you see is going to look very consistent with what you would expect. And so even though sometimes the numbers might be off a little bit, the accumulation of a lot of that information in an area, using it in that sort of zoomed out view, so helps to normalize for that. In terms of the demographic, or in terms of how to control for it when looking at individual site, we do encourage people not to click on individual block groups, but to use user-defined shapes and circular buffers of at least 1 mile to capture 4 or 5 block groups, which drives down the margin of error. But at the end of the day, this is a screening tool, and we have to balance priorities of understanding that high quality zoomed in information and balancing that with the margin of error, which is something that we do acknowledge. But at the end of the day, the information should be ground truth and made sure that it does look accurate with what is expected. The last thing I will say is that we also do have the information in there for the decennial census. So if you prefer to use the 2010 census numbers instead of ACS, there are reports for that, and there are ways to map that in our tool as well. So you can look at demographics with the ACS and with the decennial census.
Okay, thanks. Kevin, again, this one, can you explain the benefits of the EJSCREEN in comparison with using the boundary option of zip codes versus the other boundary options?
Absolutely. A lot of the times when you're looking at a county or a zip code, it's really hard to understand the dispersion, again, of where communities are. And so if you do have, for example, an unincorporated small community on the outskirts of Beverly Hills or other areas that tend to be more wealthy, then they could quickly disappear and not be captured in any sort of analysis. And that's why it's important to be able to zoom in at the neighborhood level, because we know that communities are not consistent across boundaries. Communities are not homogeneous in 20,000 person units. And so by being able to push it down to where you really can look at 1,400 residents at a time, and then have reports that can untangle that data, so you can look at what percent make 15,000 or less a year per household, what percent make 75,000 or more a household. You really start to be able to get that really granular view, which is necessary if you're doing community outreach, if you're trying to understand environmental impacts, if you're trying to understand how to approach a community for a permit or other sorts of enforcement or targeting issues. So that is where this tool can be important. And so with a lot of other things, if you're looking at climate change, a county level view can be sufficient for what you're looking for. But in the EJ context, that really local context is extremely important, and that's why we've tried to make the data pushed down as far as we can.
Okay, thank you. Next question's for the Atlas. How can we learn about best practices from communities that are doing well according to the Atlas? Has that been explored yet?
That is a really great question, actually. We do gather lots of best practices, but we have not done the work of mapping out all of the communities represented by the indicators, because there are 32 indicators now on the site. We haven't done that level of digging into the communities that are doing well, but we do highlight best practices and strategies in communities, kind of regardless of where they sit on the indicator themselves throughout the site. So as I showed you at the bottom of the page, every indicator pulls up one example of a community that's doing great work to address these inequities. And as we continue to evolve the Atlas, which really is a living resource, we will add additional examples. Also, PolicyLink and Peer, separate from the Atlas, do this work of lifting up strategies in communities that are working. PolicyLink has an America's Tomorrow newsletter. You can sign up for it on our homepage, just policylink.org, and that shares every 2 weeks. That comes out, and it shares examples of strategies that are working. We're working on an all-in-cities policy toolkit that will be released in the next 6 months or so that will make those stories more accessible and searchable in a database. And Peer also has a lot of research that you can find on their website.
Thank you. EJSCREEN, is it possible to include multiple areas to look at? Can we compare a selected area to the city or a metro area, sort of getting a side-by-side, I guess?
No, but what's great is we do have a new update coming out with the tool, and that's one of the top requests that we've heard. And so in the next version of the tool that's coming out in 2 months, you will be able to do that. You'll be able to do it in a couple of ways. One is you can do the side-by-side comparison where literally you'll pull up 2 windows. You can lock them so that you show 2 different maps but of the same area, or you can unlock them so you show 2 different areas and you can display whatever you want and display them side by side. So that is a new feature of the tool that we will be bringing in as well. And then also another way you can do comparisons is we're changing the map so that you're not only looking at the national comparison but also at the state and the county levels as well. So really being able to look at it in a lot of different contexts.
Okay, and for both platforms, is there a way for a local user to import data?
Well, I'll just quickly answer because I pointed that out a couple of times. But again, under the add your own data under map data, it's very easy as long as you have a basic level of understanding of ArcGIS, or you've printed those, published those maps as a URL. It's a very simple step.
Yeah, we do not have that function on the Atlas and are not planning to add that functionality in the near future.
Okay, and for EJSCREEN, how does the EJSCREEN relate to HUD's? I think this is affirmatively furthering fair housing, the AFFH tool. I think I got that acronym right.
You did.
Okay, good. Phew.
Yeah, and they have a great new tool. It's similar in that it's based on a geo platform, but they have a lot more data on issues related to housing and inequality, and so they have information on, for example, they have an index on affordable transportation mapped out for census tracts across the United States. They have information about average housing prices and access to different amenities. So theirs is more of a community level, but less of the environmental focus. So it's just different data. I think that they're excellent tools to use side by side, and there's a lot of stuff we would be tempted to try to take from their tool and bring into ours because it is relevant in environmental justice context. But there's a lot of tools that are really powerful just like that, and if we were to try to do that, we would be bringing in so much data it would be overwhelming to users. So I would definitely encourage users to look that up. It was just published. It's an excellent tool that HUD's put out there. We'll be linking to it shortly on our page. And but the tools are more complementary, just as the National Equity Atlas is an incredible tool and pulls in information that's so important in EJ context. It also is unique and different than what we have to bring to the table, but they work together really well side by side.
Yeah, likewise, what I would say about that is, one, PolicyLink is very actively working on the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule in terms of, we were there advocating around it, and now we are supporting jurisdictions as they develop their plans and strategies. And the Atlas, kind of reflecting what Kevin just said, we don't want to recreate what HUD has already put out in terms of their data, which is excellent. What we will say is that I think it's very complementary, because looking at the demographic changes, some of the unique indicators in the Atlas around disparities, around demographic projections, around the potential economic impacts of racial equity and inclusion, I think are great supplementary data sources for the fair housing assessments that communities will be doing. And then also we will be thinking about what are the maps or data points that we can add to the Atlas that will really add value to that process. We would want to be doing something unique and something new to contribute there.
Thank you. To wrap up, could Sarah and then Kevin once again just let people know how they can access these tools?
Yeah, absolutely. Go to nationalequityatlas.org.
And ours is pretty easy too. It's just EJSCREEN.epa.gov. And I would really encourage you to check out the PolicyLink National Equity Atlas. It's amazing. And look at both of these tools side by side, because I think you'll see that both of them together are a lot more powerful than by themselves. So
great. And again,
I agree. Thank you, Kevin.
For anyone who wants a PDF copy of this presentation, I've just uploaded it to our webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And you can catch a recording of this session on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/planningwebcast. And again, this has been approved for your SAM credits. When trying to log them, I suggest going to activities by provider and selecting today's sponsor, which is the Planning in the Black Community Division. So with that, it's 2:30. We got to wrap up. Again, I'm sorry if your questions didn't get answered. There were a ton of them. So please feel free to contact our speakers with any of your additional questions. Thank you to Carlton for hosting this event, and to our speakers, Kevin and Sarah, and to also Justin, who was able to pop in for our Q&A. Thanks to everyone, and we will talk next time. Have a great weekend.